Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and each episode we take a look at the different areas that affect change and drive revenue across your organization. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episode. Here's to the revolution. Awesome. Welcome to another day of the revolution. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and today we are privileged to have Josh Nelson, CEO of High Tide, which is a Salesforce consulting company, join us today. Josh, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you, man.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So Josh, I'm really excited about having you on. This is the first, I've done, I think probably 12 episodes or so, and I've yet to have a consultant and consulting company on. And I was really excited today because the fun thing about you is, you and I have worked together in some form or fashion, I think 2 companies now. And I've seen the work your team does, which is exceptional. But you also, in particular, you bring a ton of experience. We were talking about it, like a lot of experience in this space. And you've gotten to see a myriad of companies, a lot of different, perfect implementations, I say jokingly. And you've also you've got that kind of the ability to also have made mistakes that maybe other companies haven't had. And so I was really excited today to have you on, talk through some of those things. And I think one of the things that's always stood out to me about you guys is you have 2 things that I think you do really well. And you do all the basics as well, but your ability to scope, I think about Leanne on your team. Big shout out to Leanne, like one of my favorite people. And the detail that you guys do in that process is second to none. And so to me, it's, you've figured out this underlying base of like, hey, we've got to get really good, solid, requirements in place, which is such a key thing. And then also phenomenal people, because everybody I've worked with you guys has been really great. But I will say Leanne is like the best of the best. But, again, super excited to have you on. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. So I'll first say thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to be on the podcast. I like following it and love the content that you're pushing out. And it was funny when we were talking in the pre-show, I was like, I've been working in this space for like 12 years now, never considered myself in the revenue operations, but it's funny, we were talking about it. It's a term that, a decade or 12 years ago wasn't something that I ever considered myself being in. I was just in the heart of it from a customer side, and we call it the deal desk team or the center of excellence. And so, and I think that there's the ability to change the consulting world from oversell and underdeliver to what if we undersell and overdeliver. So Jesse, at that time, it was 2021. I don't know if you know about the economic times. Raising capital, not the best time coming right out of COVID. And so I got a few offers. It was like, hey, yeah, we'll fund your business and we'll give you 5% of the equity. I said, wait, I'm bringing the sales, the people, and the operations, and that's worth 5% of the company. Something didn't sit right. So I told AJ, and he was like, okay, Josh, we got to work on your pitch. Okay. Pitch me and let me help you on how to have these conversations. 5 minutes in, Jesse goes, stop. I'm in. I want to be the hero of this story. He goes, Josh, I'm already retired. So like, this is an investment that I'm hoping to retire upon. And I hope this doesn't come across from an ego statement, but he says, if you were a stock, I would be a buyer of your stock. And he goes, I want you to go try to create the greatest company that you can and create the best experience for customers and try to disrupt this industry. And just like that, we started High Tide, and I'm proud to tell you that we are coming up on year 3. It is funny how time flies. Year 3 is September 1st. A couple of things that I'm most proud of is we've never had a red account or a yellow account in the history of this organization. And, it's people like Leanne and the rest of my brilliant team who scope. And we have hard conversations, right? Because most customers will say, we want all this scope. Oh, we don't have budget. Let's cut out training and documentation. And we said, that's not how we operate. You can cut scope, but you can't cut training and documentation because those are the most critical things after we're gone that you will need. And that's been the premise. And so every customer that we've worked with in the history of this company is a reference. And I think that's a really powerful statement that we've never had a customer that we can't call to speak to the work that we do. And I got to tell you, I'm enjoying every day. Some people tell me I need to stop and smell the roses a little bit, but I'm just focused on disrupting what is my lived experience. And there are so many of us out there who have, had a bad experience with CPQ, or we just, sales reps feel like it doesn't provide the value that we want. And that's more a product of not of and this is something we can get into a little bit more, which is I think a lot of times we bring our legacy ideas and our legacy tool sets and we want to bend tools to meet our past selves versus looking at it as an opportunity to not bend the tool, but why don't we find the happy medium of finding who we want to be in the future and making sure the technology is set up to grow with us. So in a long story short, that's my introduction, and that's a little bit of my journey and what shaped me today.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate you going into detail on it. There's a lot, I think, a lot to unpack there. Um, it's funny. You and I have similar backgrounds in some ways. I mean, I also was an intern for a while, and kind of similar to I geeked out. A lot of people were going out and doing all the things, and I remember delivering mail, and I would meet with the executive admins, like, EAs, like nobody was like
Mhm.
thinking of that. And I would sit down and I'd be like, hey, you see CEOs every single day. Like, what do you do? Like, what do you see? Like, what are the pain points? Like, what are some of the things? And like, I got, I figured out very quickly, like, where to actually help early on. So it's kind of funny hearing some of your stories around that. But so yeah, I think a couple things I want to double click on. You talked about being thrown into things. Like you got thrown into that room when you were early on. And it's funny because when I think about really go to market, I actually think people that are drawn to this over time, like you absolutely, I don't know, I believe this maybe in my core, maybe there's people that don't, but like I think you actually have to like a little bit of pain and this whole idea, it's the whole, you talked about we have to be okay with, with ourselves because I was in a meeting today and I'm talking to one of my project managers who I'm about to promote to a director level, and she's earned it. She's done a phenomenal job. And she said, you have pretty high expectations. And I was like, I do. I was like, I do. But I said, the big thing is like at the end of the day, I'm shooting for exceptional. Like I'm not looking for good. Like good's not something that just like gets me energized every day. Like, and on the path to exceptional, like failure is a big part of it. And if we are not willing to like take the risk, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, like this is the wrong space to be in. So I completely, can relate to you on that level as well. And then I think the other thing, you talked a lot about, which I really like, is the mindset. Because hiring is hard. Like this, the risk is high. I mean, I've hired 9 people in the last 3 months, like 9, which is the most I've ever hired in my career at one time. And I'm sitting there at the end of this going, okay, statistically speaking, like probably one of two of these, who knows? Um, and I will say, the longer I've been in this, probably similar for you, like the better you get at it, but it's
Mhm.
still really hard. And, I think the mindset piece of it, even for myself, it's funny. I went in, you'll actually like this story. So I went in, I have asthma. And so I go to get allergy shots. I've been doing it for 5 years now. Last year, I did like a lung capacity test, and I think I was at like 107% of normal, right? So 7% over normal. And so, yeah, 100% is normal. So I was 7% over normal. This year, I went back in and I was at 148%. So I'd grown my lung capacity by over 40%. And she looks at me and she's like, are you working out more? And I was like, no, I'm always in good shape. But the only thing I've changed is I've started incorporating breathing exercises into my daily life. That's it. That's the only thing that I've changed. And so it's interesting, like hearing even you talk about it, because I think, it's these little tweaks at this point in the career. It used to be that my intelligence and hard work, work ethic would get me places. Now I would say like it's more about discipline. It's doing the things I don't want to do, and it's honestly breathing and doing just these like simple mindset, funny things that a lot of people brush off or aren't, again, back to discipline, maybe aren't willing to do. So I completely relate to the mindset. And as you're hiring people, surrounding yourself with other people that, to your point, like how do you get 1% better as a person every single day? That is an exponential mindset. And again, that's where exceptional lies, not just good. So man, I love that. That's a cool way to lay it out.
Yeah, I think I mean, we're so similar in so many ways. I used to think that the faster I could go, the more that I could create. And years later, I'm realizing that it's all about sustainability. And the more that we take care of ourselves and especially our minds, we go much farther because I would do these like sprints and then I'd be exhausted and I'd drop off. And there is power in consistency versus the up and down.
Exactly it. So that's fun, man. I appreciate you kind of walking through that. You know, I think one of the things that I was really excited to dive into today, and again, back to pain, is I really want to know like what is the most messed up thing that you've walked into? Where I mean, we're talking like, and by messed up, let me define this for everybody else, because to me and you, messed up actually equals fun, or at least I'm sure it does for you. For me, it does. Like, because I'm one of those people, I don't maintain things. I'm not, you bring me in to fix stuff. Like that's the whole reason I'm brought in, probably similar to you as well. So when I say messed up, I really mean dysfunctional, fun problem, lots of change management, which I think you guys are really good at. What was fundamentally missing there? What did you guys do to help turn it around? Was it too far gone? I'd love to hear a story around that end.
There's one in particular that all was kind of like a defining moment for my career because it was one of the largest deals that we had ever closed and worked on. And I think when we think about these technology projects, sometimes there's a couple different mindsets. One, if you hire the big four, you typically don't get fired if the project goes wrong, but the project goes wrong a lot because you're paying for professional development. And I will tell you, Jesse, 80% of our CPQ business is remediation. So, that's what we're brought in. We're brought into like, how do we fix this? And this particular client had spent over $2 million on a phase one implementation. It took them over 6 months to bring a new SKU to market. As a go-to-market, I know you're heavy on the go-to-market things. Can you imagine having to wait? You do all the planning and the prep, and then you're like, oh, it's going to take 6 months for us to roll it out and make it even quotable. Like that's unacceptable, and no business can operate like that. I think, and it's really hard because, and I will focus on SaaS-based organizations right now. I think SaaS, when you hit those jumps, right, and your user count is growing and you're expanding into accounts, it's so exciting. And one of the things AJ has taught me is if you don't plan your infrastructure for who you're going to be, you're going to have to react. And all of us know a proactive approach is going to lead to better growth than a reactive approach. And so we got in here and the client was like, we've spent all this money. The tool doesn't work. We can only quote new business. We can't like add on to exist. So every part of their process was broken. And we said, how did we get here? And that was the first question in the C-suite was like, well, you don't know, like we hired a big consulting firm and this is where we ended up. And so number one, when I look back, it's the C-suite has to be involved and they have to be driving the why. And I think so many times we look at like an investment into our revenue operations as a thing we have to do versus a thing that we get to do, and thinking about how that can accelerate our time to value. And the underlying thing we don't think about, because a lot of people buy CPQ because of the ROI is massive for your sales reps, the efficiency for your deal desk teams. But what it really does, it's the customer experience that it can absolutely change. No, I don't know about you, Jesse. I don't like getting a quote and then the rep coming back and saying, oh, I did the wrong products. It's actually going to be $10,000 more. That's that customer experience. And you never know who knows somebody, and that experience then trickles down, and then your brand starts to deteriorate. And so we were brought in this scenario, and we spent like, I think 8 weeks of pro bono time evaluating, interviewing people, investigating what went wrong. And the whole project was, do we remediate or do we do a fresh implementation? And Jesse, I like to think about CFOs as having a heart, and I can't imagine trying to do the budget spend and evaluate the spend on CRM and CPQ when it feels like you're just always being asked for more budget. And so what we did was like, okay, what is like the must have? I'm a big proponent for like not these big bang projects, but like what's the MVP? And for those listening in, minimal viable product for the business to see value. And we created this kind of phased roadmap, and it took an army of the client side and our side. But what changed is that we had executive alignment, VP alignment, admin alignment. And those are the things that started to change it. But customers also, and I hit on this point earlier, we can't just think about bringing our former selves and bending any new tool to who we were. It's an opportunity to take a hard look at ourselves and say, we've grown a ton and we've got growing pains. Who do we want to be in 2 to 5 years from now? How is our strategy going to change? Are we looking to expand into global markets? How do we make sure that a tool is going to to not be a hindrance to that, but also that we feel like we can own it. And that, my experience of like, we don't just throw products and services and say, reps, here you go. But like, how do we make it like this cohesive thing that customers understand and they can see the vision for it as well? So I think, look, one of the things, Jesse, is sometimes I get a little self-conscious about High Tide because we're a smaller boutique firm. And one of my references recently said, being boutique is your superpower, right?
Yep.
She goes, I could have had any consulting firm come in here, but I like knowing that I can call you on the phone. She lived in San Diego. She goes, and I know where you live. She's like, but I want to know that I'm one of your top 5 most important clients. I don't want to just be thrown into a heap of 100 clients. And so I think when you look at taking on some of these digital transformation projects, or if you need to do a remediation, it's not about the logo of, who they work for. The most critical piece, Jesse, and this, you shouted her out multiple times, it's who's on your project. That will be one of the most defining characteristics of if you're going to be successful. Now, this comes with a big assumption that the business knows what they want, that we have, alignment across sales and finance on, what are the requirements, and making sure that we all feel like we're getting wins in the first phase. But, this project was a $4 million remediation project. So this client, $6 million into spend on just CPQ. And they finally got to a point where at least they could bring SKUs to market. I think we took it down from 6 months to 2 weeks, which 2 weeks we can live with, right? Because that can just be worked into our product rollout. But that's one of the coolest stories that I've been a part of. And yeah, I hope that answered your question on like one of the most challenging ones. And there were hard conversations. There were some, we took some yelling at from the C-suite members because they kept us in line to make sure that we were providing value. But look, I come from the customer side, and one of the biggest things I can tell anyone today, if you're evaluating, is it's not about the brands. Who are the references? Can they connect you with somebody who's gone live with a similar use case in the last 6 months and tell me, before I sign on the line, I want to see in my SAL who's on my project. Those 2 things will take you much farther than just signing up because they have a great brand or they have they have a NASCAR slide of logos that you may know.
No, that's a great one. And, you hit on something that's really key. And it's something I think a lot about, and it's really around value, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm working on budgeting right now. Our fiscal year ends at the end of September. And so we're like right in the middle of budget planning. And, I've been in orgs as well where, I've gone through layoffs like probably a lot of people now in SaaS have at this point. And, you know, the biggest thing, especially with the CFO side of things, because that's a huge piece of it. And a lot these days, especially with the CEO, where I'm spending a lot of time is, hey, should we do this or not? Should we, hire this out? How should we scale this out? And I think the MVP side of it, exactly what you said, I've got a big project I just kicked off this week to build out a big partner portal. And, I hired an 8-person boutique, firm, very similar size. And this is all they do. They only do partner portals, help build out partner ecosystems. And for me, that comfort of knowing, like I've talked to the two co-founders, and to your point, I know exactly who's on the team, and I was referred in there by a guy who they did this big implementation for as well. So it goes a long way. And the reality is that's really important. It's interesting you talk about if you hire one of the big 4, they can't fire you. And I get why people want to do it that way. I totally understand it. Like, job security is big, but at the same time, again, I'm not looking for good. I'm looking for exceptional. And yeah, I mean, to me, again, exceptional lies in taking risk. And I do think if you get good enough at the MVP concept, because I had a scoping call today, and I had one of my partner RevOps, field operations people on the call, and I said, look, I know you want to make this thing a lot better. I totally see it. I was like, but right now we need to get something out that has substantially more value than it is today. And here are the 3 areas of focus. If it's not in the 3 areas of focus, put it on the phase 2 roadmap. So I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, looking at it that way, for me, there's some freedom in that, because it allows for some creativity, but also provides the focus, which is really key.
Yeah, and my mentor AJ, who I've mentioned, he said this quote rings true to me all the time. He goes, "Cost is only concern in the absence of value." Yep. And I think that statement, because of value, that statement kind of drives what I think about. And that doesn't mean that we want to inflate budgets, but it means if you're creating a world-class solution and you can create the value and you can show that ROI over, annualized over however long it may take, that's where true value comes in. And there is power in creating value.
Well, and I even think back on, the implementation we did with you guys last time, my last company, and the way we did it, we did two phases, right? It was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what are the quick wins that we can get out in the next 3 months? So we can show the company, like, you're not just giving us a large sum of money and we'll see you in a year. It's like, okay, here are the quick wins that are going to really provide substantial value, reinforce to the business, like, oh, maybe we should give RevOps, this budget to go out and build this thing. And also acknowledging that some things just take longer, like renewals and amendments. Oh my gosh, you know how that goes. Like,
Yes.
I knew that was going to be a 9 month, minimum project, but that's not all of it. And so, I think there's something about that, again, going back to the MVP, phasing things out versus just this, massive project that we eventually get to, it communicates a different level of responsibility too. And I also think, like, for you to check in with yourself of, are we focused on value, or are we just allowing everything to be done? It's like not everything's important. So how do you prioritize those items?
Yeah, and I think I know this will resonate with you, but I like to take a data-driven approach. When you have a system that's not servicing you anymore, you're going to hear it, but you're going to hear a lot of emotional feedback because it can be challenging if it's not servicing them. And so one of the things I think is really important is talk to your people. Don't just listen to the opinions. Us who work in sales, some of us have really loud voices and it can carry very strongly within the organization. But I'm a proponent, like, get down to talk to your revenue operations folks, talk to the deal desk folks, like get the underlying, get that underlying understanding of what is from a data perspective. Don't make this subjective. Objectively tell me how the system is not serving us. And then those things should drive your MVP, not the narrative or the emotional impact. And I think another thing you can do is when we think about these tools, I like to describe them as sticky because they really do touch like sales, legal, IT, finance, and operations. And one way, and you just said this, I'm just kind of reiterating your point, which is that first MVP, try to get a little win for each group and watch how they start to buy into future enhancements on the platform. I think that's one of the biggest things you can do, because I feel bad because a lot of times finance is like our neighbor that we're just like, we're hoping that life gets better for them, but we're really just throwing a bag of trash over the fence. Hey, finance, figure this out. And there is something about the companies who have the tightest alignment between sales, operations, and finance are some of the most efficient companies that I've ever seen.
It's, man, I can't even, that's a great point. And it's one that I've had to learn the hard way. And I will say it, in my current role, that's exactly what I've done here at the beginning. It's been very focused on how do I get a win for legal? How do I get a win for finance? How do I get a win for sales? And how do I get a win for marketing? And I think, again, it comes back to that trust of like, hey, we're all in this together. We all feel the pain of poor execution and poor process and bad system design. So it's a great call out. Along those lines, like, talk to me a little bit, as far as mistakes are concerned, what are like two or three that you see companies make when they're starting to, bring on a consulting firm or even just do big projects in general? What are two or three mistakes you see most often?
Yeah, number one, I think I mentioned earlier, is your C-suite and your VPs not knowing the why and actively driving that message to all of the teams who report up to them. I think sometimes we think, oh, we can throw money at this problem and then we're going to go off and do other things. But, this large client that I talked about, the CEO of that company did video-based rollouts on their like company-wide meeting saying like, I want you to let you know, like, we're investing in this project. They had a project name. Here's the why behind it. And people want to see the vision of the CEO and the why. And then that drives people being more tied to it versus sometimes these decisions can be made in a vacuum. And then what that creates is infighting between organizations because everyone wants to say, well, I want this and I want this. So I think number one is the leaders have to drive the vision and they have to enable the team members operating underneath them. They got to protect them and they got to, sell to the business why we're doing this. So these aren't projects where you can just, sign a check and then, check out. I think you got to be engaged if you really want to see the value and the ROI behind the investments in these tools. So I think number one, when we at High Tide don't have executive alignment at the CRO, CFO, or CEO level, red flag, we're not signing up to work with you until we have that alignment, because we know that's one of the number one things that make these projects go red. I think number two is that customers don't know what they don't know about the product. And this, I may get in trouble for this statement, but if you listen, if your source of truth and your trusted advisor and your guiding person is the vendor you're buying from, what do you think's going to occur there, right? They're doing their day job, which is to drive the largest ACV that they can, the most license count. But you have to reach out to people. And I would say, if someone was like, I don't know how to do RevOps, I would send them to you. I'd say, go listen to this podcast, and I can connect you with Jesse, and he'll spend some time with you and tell you about his lived experience. I think too often and I hope this comes across in the right way, there's a lack of education in buying knowledge and understanding kind of why we're doing it, but like, how do we do it? We understand the why, but so many times, like I've been in conversations where it's like, oh yeah, this is the art of what's possible. Here's the Ferrari demo. And then I get to the customer and they're like, well, we can afford a Honda Civic. Yep. And that's a hard conversation, because I got to backtrack what they think is reality versus what is actually reality. So I think before you even start to engage and think about buying licenses, like there are a lot of great podcasts. There's a lot of information out here on RevOps, on CPQ, on CRM. So I would do your due diligence. I would have some, pick off somebody on LinkedIn and say, can I spend a half an hour with you picking your brain and get real experience? That doesn't mean that vendors don't have a lot of value and they can create customer references for you as well. But you need trusted advisors before you need what's the art of what's possible on this platform. And I'll also make one more statement, which is to say that there's a buzzword out there, Jesse, AI, right? Every company wants to figure out how to leverage AI, and AI is nothing without quality and accessible data. And I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of orgs. I've seen some of the most world-class brands that you've ever seen. I pull up the hood of that company and I look underneath, and it is not world-class. Their data is in separate systems. They're over here. They're over here. Their reporting is like, send me this report. I'm going to try to like merge these spreadsheets and try to figure it out. So when we think about taking on like what we would call like transformation or AI, I hope everyone hears this statement. It starts with data, and you likely need a data remediation project. And you need to talk to people like Jesse or other people who have long-term experience working with data and how that influences your go-to-market strategy. So just like I have so many mentors in my life who guide what I do, find a trusted advisor and know that these projects, everything, the underlying, other than the architecture, the data is what drives everything. And it is the most critical piece to how we manage our businesses today.
And it's probably the most underestimated, component of what it is. I think it's, I was reading an article earlier about, obviously how much AI is now being invested in across organizations. But you're right. At the end of the day, it is the underlying data, and the data is driven by really good business process and really good systems, right? And at the end of the day, I think your cleanup project, that's the piece that even I always joke with my team on. It's the thing that I like secretly don't want to ever actually think about, but backfilling like is always the thing that gets you the most, or cleanup. Those are the two things that you can have the best built out architecture in the world, but if you don't figure out how to do that, man, it's just such a mess. So it's a good call out.
Absolutely.
Talk to me like a little bit about what have you seen the most underutilized like tool process within a SaaS business? Where's like the biggest opportunity you think that businesses maybe haven't opened their eyes to? We think about certain components that are probably the norm, but where do you feel like a lot of opportunity is for these SaaS companies?
That's a really good question. I think so many SaaS companies are in different evolutions of their life cycle. Everyone wants to be a unicorn these days, right? But when I talk to a lot of these companies, their data are in spreadsheets or they're in outdated systems, and they're like, yeah, we have 20 years of data that we can't report on. And it's in this like homegrown system we built or something like that. So I think I'm going to double down on this, which is to say the most impactful things you can do is a data transformation project that structures your data in a way that's going to serve you to make as close to real-time insights as possible. And what I mean by that is like, you got to be agile in today's SaaS world. You got to be able to pivot based on your customers' needs. If a new product's coming to market that's starting to commoditize what you have as an organization, you got to be ready to, what's our next level of advancement? And so I think looking at some of like these tools, I'll mention one like a Power BI tool, or these tools that even, I'm not saying that you have to take on this massive project to bring all of your data into one spot at the start. What we can do is utilize these tools that connect into all of these different data sources and then put it into a visualization that your teams can use to make informed decisions. And then I think once you have that data and you're making informed data-driven decisions, not emotion, as much as that's very difficult for us human beings. I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do today, because even before you invest in like a CPQ tool, which obviously we can create a lot of value, without the right data, we're still not going to see the fruitions behind those investments. So if a company, if somebody came to me and say, I have a SaaS-based company, what is the one thing I can do to help my business grow and make more informed decisions? I would say, let's look at your data and let's figure out a way to structure it in a way that serves you. Because right now it's a lot of what we call swivel chairing. I'm in one system, I'm in another system. And I was talking to someone recently, and she spends 50% of her time manually updating systems and creating custom reports. And we did this annualized benefit of like, if you make an investment into centralizing your data or connecting it via an integration, what's 50% of her time annualized over a year worth to you? So it's all data, man. That's the thing that drives everything moving forward.
So last question, this has been awesome. Talk to me a little bit. If you have a CEO that's listening to this, and what 3 to 5 pieces of advice would you give them from a go-to-market perspective, to help them, get a better handle around this area and perspective?
I think there's no one size fits all. So let's caveat my recommendation is always going to be very unique to wherever you're at, who you are as a CEO, right? Is it your first time? Did you bootstrap this from the ground up, or, do you have investment dollars behind you? So I'm going to take a second because it's a very good question. If I'm meeting with a CEO, the first thing that I want to do is understand, where are we today versus who do we want to be in? Like, you and I both have that same mindset. We're not going for good. We're not even going for great. Like, I think we're going for world class. And I think it's this, as a CEO in my own right, I mean, I think about all the mistakes that I wish I would have avoided if I had a better way of making decisions. And so number one for a CEO is, I see so often that the reports that they're getting or the data that they're getting is convoluted. It can be incorrect. It's, I can't tell you how many customers are still trying to work on TCV, ARR, and MRR. That's a must-have calculation that must be correct when we forecast our business. So number one, if I'm a CEO today, I trust but verify. An engineering term, like, you surround yourself with great people, but you've got to verify that even they are getting the correct data that they're reporting to you. So I know I'm harping on the data, and I'm sorry for those listening in, but number one is, like, a CEO today, we need to make data-based and data-driven decisions. We can't just be reacting, because like, our hearts are in this thing, right? We give everything we can to our organizations, and sometimes that can lead us to make emotional decisions. The second piece I would say, especially in a growing SaaS-based organization, and it's something that, the great company that I talked about before, Perceptive Software, the CEO of that organization, it felt like he was in the heartbeat of the organization. And it's so hard not to be pulled up and worrying about, like, we got investor relations that we have to deal with, and we've got customers that we need to meet with, but you can't lose the heartbeat of your organization. And that comes from sitting down with your people, listening to them. And you talked earlier about promoting from within. I'm a big proponent of, like, if they've given their time and you can see who they can become in the future, sit down with them and, like, create a career path, because what you get out of a person whose heart is in your organization is much different than the person who's there transactionally that you hired off the street because they were looking to make a salary increase. And so for CEOs, data-driven decisions, number one. Two, we get pulled in so many different directions, but you cannot lose sight of your people because they know your business better than you at this point. They're with your customers, they know how you operate. And so, as much as I listen to all of the leaders around me, trust but verify. So, trust it, but then go verify with the people who are working, especially revenue operations. I'll tell you, you'll learn a lot about your business by going and talking to the people who are running RevOps within your organization. The last one, Jesse, I think that I would touch on is the mindset of the CEO as well. I think one of the things, and this will be like kind of a personal, kind of anecdote that I bring to the table, is that um, this life is hard. Life is hard in general, and growing businesses and hiring people, as you mentioned, is like, look, I have made every mistake when it comes to hiring. I'll be the first to admit that. But I think the mindset of the CEO can trickle down to your employees in a way that can inspire them. And this is something that one of my mentors taught me. We're, as human beings, I'll tell you before you tell me what I can't do. I will create a wall before you ever tell me what wall I can. And I think the mindset of knowing that's part of our innate anatomy, or our how our brains work. I think the CEO needs to be vulnerable. They need to show empathy. And I think some of the most inspiring leaders that we have today, they have honest conversations with their people, and they're not afraid to show their vulnerabilities or their growth that they've gone through. And so, we've spoken so much on technology and data, but at the end of the day, I'll always come back to mindset being like the number one variable in anything that we do. Resiliency. And a quote I have written on my office, maybe I've shared it with you, is if you're uncomfortable, you're growing. And that's like a mindset to live in. And those uncomfortable moments are so challenging, as a CEO, especially. Like, I spent a lot of late nights. I spent a lot of, I have a 5-month-old. I got my 5-month-old in one hand, and I'm trying to do the voice to text or on my computer, trying to send emails. But I think in this world of being a unicorn and growing in SaaS, I think the way that you get people and your customers to want to be a part of your story is the mindset and what you bring to the table. And one thing I'll say is storytelling is way better than selling. And that's one evolution that we've gone through, is like the CEO needs to be able to tell their own story or her story of how they got there, but also that will get your customers to buy in and have emotional connection to your organization. And I think some of the largest companies in SaaS have done that really well. It's not just the value they create, but it's like they want to buy in and be part of the story of this organization. And I think as a CEO, there's, so many intangibles and very specific things like, well, our board meetings and how we're projecting our numbers and all of that. And all of that's critically important. But I think the human element cannot be lost in this. And so that would be my recommendation if a CEO wanted to ask what the 3 things I think that influence growth in business.
Those are good. Those are good. I like the storytelling one. It's hard. Like, it's amazing at how hard it is to get everybody. And it's not, it's hard in the sense of just getting everybody to exercise that muscle. And I talk about it a lot with the team too, of, I was talking to the same person this morning about the promotion, and it's amazing at how much we can be our own self enemy. And I think even the story we tell ourselves, and the why behind why we're here, and um, the value we can bring to companies. There's just something really impactful about, and even as a leader, I think it's something I think a lot about is, you do as well. We all have tough days, and the
Yeah.
reality is how we show up for our people, and and even sometimes like owning that. Like I've had to do that a little bit more recently. Of like, guys, I'm like burned out on gas right now. Here's what I need to work through. I found, but also at the same time balancing. It's not even balancing that, but being real on the other side of like, I'm still loving where we're at and the problems we're solving. But we're not all going to have perfect days. And I don't know. There's something even in the leadership side that's been really impactful on that end of it.
Can I share one more thing
Yeah.
you really got my brain going. And I think this is something that, as leaders, we have to show our vulnerability, as I talked about. But one thing happened, Jesse, recently to me. I'm the best critic of myself. I am so good at being a critic of myself. And one day I don't know if it was on social media or what I saw, but there was this thing that if you expect to create impact in the world and you want to have inspire people, it starts with how you talk to yourself up here. And recently I just had this epiphany, and it started like this. I'm going to be very transparent. I spent The Four Agreements is a book that I really love. I'll recommend that for anyone who wants to kind of like help work on your mindset and how you grow. But I wrote the Four Agreements on my mirror in my bathroom. And every day I went in there and I forced myself for 30 seconds to smile at myself while looking in my own eyes. And it was frankly uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable.
Yep.
Why am I doing this? It makes no sense. But something started to change. And then one day I thought, again, I've said this a couple of times, this life is so hard. There are so many things, variables that we're navigating. Why am I adding to, what's already a hard existence? And one day I started being my own champion. And I would talk to myself and be like, I appreciate you. I appreciate what we're doing, and then I was able to develop that muscle to say like, I love myself and I appreciate myself. And there's something that happens in this brain of ours that when we start to talk positively to ourselves, what you're able to give like can exponentially grow. And so like, I know so many people who are so hard on themselves, and I'm telling you, like, it's a weird process. It's so like foreign against like how we kind of operate in today's society. But if you can start to develop the muscle of saying nice things to yourself, and I'll give you a very good an example. You ever have those moments where like you just do something where you're like so almost idiotic in your mind, like that you might say something like, I'm such an idiot.
Yep.
And I stop that. When I hear that, I then hit it with two compliments, because it's so easy in our world to be so mean to ourselves. And I think when you start talking positively to yourself, like I said earlier, who you can be, what you can be to your people changes dramatically. And so like, if there's one thing that you take away from this podcast, if nothing else, I would say start thinking about how to be kinder to yourself and give yourself grace, and start being your own champion first, and watch what starts happening in your life.
And I love it. That's good. I haven't, I've never put words to it, but I've never even heard of that book. So I'm gonna have to look up the book. I'm super excited about that one. But I love the mindset attitude, and especially from a leadership perspective, but obviously for everybody. But I do think there's something powerful in it, because it's easy to get sucked down into the mire of the minutia and the failure and the inadequacy. Because again, when your bar is exceptional, it's a little bit harder, right, to get to that point. But I think I'm going to circle this all the way back to around to the beginning of what you said, that learning mentality of just, we're constantly trying to better ourselves, not forget, the comparison, piece you talked about, but it's that 1% better every day. And part of that better is not just knowledge, but also I think how you treat yourself, which I think is a big part of it. So it's a good call out.
Absolutely.
Josh, thanks so much for joining, man. It's been awesome having you on.
It's a pleasure. I'm so grateful that you would have me on. And I'll just one more plug here. If anyone's in revenue operations, like I can't recommend Jesse enough in terms of if you want to talk about data, if you want to talk about revenue operations for SaaS-based companies, like if somebody asked me who I'd refer them to, it would be you, friend. So thank you so much for having me on.
Appreciate that. And if you guys aren't following Josh, he also has his own podcast as well, which is really great. Check it out. Like I've said before, his team does a great job. But you can find him on LinkedIn. I think is that the best place to find you?
That is. I'm always on there.
Awesome. So if you guys haven't, like, subscribe. But thank you all for joining. Josh, have a great rest of the day. Thanks, man. Hit like, subscribe to continue to follow along as we get to impact change across our organizations in the industry. To the journey.